حضرات السيدات والسادة.
Ladies and gentlemen, your attention, please. Ladies and gentlemen, your attention. In the name of Allah, most merciful, most compassionate, peace and blessing be on our Prophet, his kith and kin, Honorable Speaker of the House of Representatives, the Honorable Secretary General of the IUP, the Honorable Representative of Religious for Peace, representing the United Nations, the Honorable Dr. Ahmed Abadi, the President of the Mohammedi League of Moroccan Scholars. Ladies and gentlemen, dear attendees, with the help of God, we really inch into the closing session. I'd like to give the floor to the rapporteurs of the workshops so that they can provide us with the nitty-gritty bullet points and findings of each workshop on its side. And one of the first rapporteur will be Mrs. Nanila Qani, the rapporteur of the United Nations with regard to the freedom of religions and creeds. The floor is yours, Mrs. Naziha.
This is a summary of the high-level panel working together for the promotion of the rule of law, good practices and challenges. The first high-level panel discussed working together for the promotion of the rule of law, good practices and challenges. The rule of law runs counter to any arbitrary exercise of power and calls for the accountability of all institutions, individuals and groups to the same standard. The rule of law also assumes adherence to international law and human rights standards. Our first panelist, the Secretary General of the World Evangelical Alliance, said that religions and beliefs played a fundamental role in setting moral standards alongside the rule of law. He also highlighted the challenges in successfully legislating to allow freedom of religion or belief. Secondly, we heard from the Executive Director of Globe Ethics, who said that the rule of law was the basis for peaceful societies, but was not enough on its own. The world was facing a mistrust, and the challenge for both religious leaders and politicians was to build their ethical authority. Laws could protect freedom of religion or belief, but societies needed to believe in their added value for the common good. Next, the director of the International Panel of Parliamentarians for Freedom of Religion or Belief, IPP4, and former member of the parliament in Bolivia, explained that her organization supported MPs in their own initiatives to advance the human right of freedom of religion or belief. She noted that building democracy was the joint task of politicians and civil society, and that it was vital to nurture cooperation between the actors from different religions and beliefs around the world. The Speaker of the Congress of Deputies of Spain said that the rule of law enabled peace and coexistence in communities. The state was responsible for protecting the community and needed to work with religions or beliefs to do so, while remaining impartial. The law also needed to protect religious freedom, giving people the space in which to grow and to prosper, and to counter discourses of hate and discrimination. The Executive Secretary of the G5 Sahel Interparliamentary Committee spoke about how the rule of law provided a framework in which everyone was treated on an equal footing. Parliaments had an important role to play in promoting and preserving the rule of law, particularly amid security crises such as in the Sahel. Interfaith and intra-faith dialogue could foster development on a global scale. Next, we heard from an imam and a rabbi, the co-founders of the Amana organization in Sweden, which works to counter anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. They spoke about the recent burning of the Quran in their country. Their organization was engaging with the Swedish Parliament to find appropriate and even-handed solutions to this expression of hatred, calling for multiple lines of action, not confined only to legal responses. The discussion was then open to the floor, and participants spoke about the representation of different religions and beliefs in their parliament or states, successes in building societies in which people of many religions and beliefs lived in harmony, the role of global bodies as forums for interfaith dialogue, and the importance of religious education. Participants also highlighted good practices with regard to youth issues, responses to blasphemy, the blessings and burdens of diversity, the necessity to include non-believers and non-citizens in dialogue, and the recognition and registration of religion and belief communities. All participants agreed that parliamentarians had a responsibility to uphold the rule of law, and that the cooperation of parliaments with religious leaders and civil society was beneficial. It was an excellent panel, and I was delighted to moderate it. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much indeed for your contribution. Now, time has come to consolidate regional and international peace among religion. This is the second work of the workshop, and the second component will be presented by Mr. Ahmed Al-Abbadi, the Secretary General of the Mohammadi League of Scholars. The floor is yours, Mr. Mohammadi.
The panel had the goal to see clearly in the functionality of intra-religious dialogue to promote peace, and that regionally and globally, but also to enforce the rule of law in our world, and also to face the matters of interpretational derives. For when you hijack a religious text and use non-consentized upon tools of interpretation, you might come up with matters that the religious text has never intended. And we gave a salient example to that, which was extremism that would lead to terrorism, that would lead to crimes against humanity. It all starts by interpretations. And we've spotted, through the interventions of the panelists, we have spotted many magnetisms, many grievances, and many other legislative matters that would be leaned upon to derive some interpretations that would legitimize terrorism in various confessions. And the panelists have addressed this. We had a very rich panel. Mr. Naik has also put in exergue those dimensions and recommended that the scholastic, knowledgeable approach to interpretation needs to be regulated, but also we need to have horizons before our brains, souls, and eyes that we would target by those interpretations. The panelists have agreed upon the fact that the finality of finalities in all religions was to provide happiness here and in the hereafter. and that the codifications were statistically wise nothing beyond 4% of the religious texts, whereas the other 96% are about love, are about connectedness, are about doing together and living together. And codification share in all religions is nothing beyond this. Also, we have tackled, I have challenged one of the panelists, Mr. Al-Khou'i, asking him, since I am a Sunni on this panel, and you are a Shi'i on that same panel, how would you demonstrate the functionality of intra-religious dialogue, just to differentiate ourselves from the kambayas of where brothers and sisters love each other, and so on? His response was very vibrant. He said, well, I have a practice that I would qualify as being the best. We could extinguish fires of fitna and of differences in Iraq through intra-faith dialogue, and it was functional. And it started very painfully in the beginning, but yet afterwards we could prevail, and now we do not pretend that it's perfection, because solutions do come in pixels. And then I've challenged Ma'am Speaker, who also has addressed those matters, by asking her, well, what is the role of academia in those regards? And her response was also very vibrant, because she could say that academia is to master the toolbox for interpretation and of interaction with the texts, but also for the evaluation of implementation. Through her vast expertise, she could interact in a very clear way about this matter and challenge. We had also Mr. Herring, who was in the panel as an Irish representative of the Irish Parliament, and his contribution was very valuable, because he also could put in exergue the Irish experience, and he demonstrated that it was a very wonderful bliss and blessing to have intra-faith dialogue, because we could avoid many threats, and we could start a certain building together, which was echoed by the room, and it was very beautiful, by an English parliamentarian who has validated this approach and witnessed that it was so. The room has interacted in a very positive way, and we could reach the following recommendations. One, to be elected as spokesman of a nation, parliamentarians who are translating, interpreting the heartbeats of their nations, and who are trying to bring into reality their aspirations and their hopes, do have the keen responsibility to listen well. And I loved very much the fact that one of the panelists, Licia, who was talking about youth, said, well, we should recall that God has created us with 2 ears, but with 1 mouth. So we should listen more, and I really appreciated their support. She also advocated for the contribution of youth, not just to be given an opportunity to speak and express themselves, but also to bring up solutions, because the globe, the planet, is theirs more than it is ours, those older generations. So among the recommendations was the fact that we needed some expertise, some basics to be there, and if they are not there, we should also look for the sustainable training and capacities building to allow our parliamentarians to be better interpreters. As for the religious leaders, we have recommended that we needed academia to step in, to go through the complexifications and complexities, to state the problems, and then to tackle them and address them in order to find solutions to those problems. Because emotions and the dictations of religious texts and codifications of the religious text would not suffice to lift us up towards this platform of fruitful interfaith dialogue to solve the problems and to establish security and peace regionally and globally. We also have agreed upon the fact, and it is among the recommendations, that we needed sustainable work through forums, and that this not should be delayed and just vanishing, sliding away towards being mere memories, but we need sustainable forums in which we would continue discussing and tackling those matters. Last but not least, education is crucial. Not just the programs of the curriculum, but also the didactics and pedagogy that are adopted, and a greater role for our younger generations so that we can allow appropriation of those big problematics and build up capacities to see clearer and not just as dictated dogmas, but appropriated convictions. I would love to end here by the fact that education is to be yoked also with the global dream of living together on this little tiny pale blue dot as one extended family, watching for each other and trying to avoid the worst. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks very much indeed, Dr. Ahmed Al-Abadi. The findings, particularly with regard to the first component, particularly on the rule of law, on the religions, important models and models that will be presented by Professor Alfonso Santiago. He is the director of the School of International Relations in the University of Austral, Argentina. He will be reading out the findings of his workshop. The floor is yours, sir. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning to you all. Our panel has addressed the topic of the articulation holding between politics and religion, between religious community and state. We have attempted to convey a concrete and tangible findings, and we have been able to revise these principles and their definitions in the various constitutions, particularly whether in Europe, Asia, Africa, or in America. And the various speakers who took part in this workshop have underscored that the principle of structure involving religious authority and political authority is established in the national constitutional text and national, as well as in the practical reality on the ground. And we came to an agreement in this panel on the definition of the terms that needs to define the relationship holding between the state and religious community and between politics and religion at the parliamentary level. The first basic principle pertains to the distinction being made of the political order with regard to the religious order. And so since it's a different order as to the final goals and the missions and the methods that are used, and subsequent to this first distinction that was made, it's up to the state to take into consideration, and in a very positive way, the religious phenomena, because religion brings quite a lot of positive things to the citizens and to the community. And religions give a meaning to life, give cohesion to the communities and to the families, and encourage solidarity between people and taking care of the most vulnerable segments of our communities. And so through religion, there are limitations to to the political power, to scientific development. They can dehumanize, contribute to dehumanize humanity, and then this reinforces the moral convictions of the of staff and who are indispensable for the achievement of the welfare and well-being. Subsequent to the first distinction, the state on the basis of the goods, right after this definition, positive definition was made, that what we need to do is to give freedom to the religious and freedom of worship to all individuals as well as the groups, while recognizing their autonomy, the women autonomy, particularly as well as the religious economy. We need to recognize this freedom in the widest possible sense, as is the case in the international text. Recognition, individual recognition, but with autonomy for the for collective populations. And so one thing that has been identified pertains to engage in making this articulation between politics and religious people through agreements, and particularly within an equality framework. All this is based on the secular rule of law, particularly, and there is the freedom of thinking, whether they are believers or non-believers. And so this is a large recognition of the concept, particularly of the right to the freedom of religion. And there is another bullet point that was underscored very often in terms is respect. We talk about respect quite often, but in our panel we wanted to go beyond, but we not limit ourselves to respect, but also respect involving various religious groups so that they can really dovetail and work towards establishing peace for the upholding of human rights and social justice. And these are key elements which are really common challenges for standing in the way of religious community work. Religious communities have a more cross-cutting vision, which gives a meaning to their life. But there are activities that are in agreement with the political agenda, and so the political authority need to take this opportunity and need to grab this inspiration from religion to be able to move forward and convey to the people and to the community at all the necessary messages so that they can be really can cope with the challenges that are common to all in their capacity as human beings who have a right to a decent living. Finally, our panel, we said that we need not just define good ideas, which is the cause, but we needed to go more to action rather than limiting ourselves to defining some of the initiatives that have been put forth and tabled to promote the social activities and continue to really disseminate all the profitable effects accruing from religion, particularly in the community, but equally the need to sign an agreement or a declaration in order for the freedom of religion and interfaith dialogue. And we have addressed as well other bullet points subsequent to a general consensus, and so we need to convey that there is consensus-based agreement through the drafting of a declaration so that these conclusions have more visibility and more legal clout and power. And so we need to engage in more exchanges. What are the conclusions accruing from the work concerning this aspect that pertains to having more institutional relations involving religious communities? We notice that there are various possibilities, but there are common principles that are the underpinning foundations and that could be drafted in an international declaration. Thank you.
We have a report note on peace and inclusion and how parliamentarians can collaborate with other religious figures in order to promote integration and better relations, to be presented by Mr. Elias Inziki for cooperation between the different faiths in the United States, Caribbean, Argentina, and Peru.
Bueno, continúa.
We're going to continue. We'll speak in Spanish.
Yo también.
Equally, like my preceding friend from Argentina, Mr. Santiago. So I am going to summarize the bullet points accruing from our workshop, how parliamentarians can work together with a religious group for more moderation and more solidarity and more inclusion. And so our panel has offered a room, an open space to really engage in sincere dialogue and sincere reflections among we had MPs, religious leaders involved, and interfaith dialogue, practitioners of interfaith dialogue. And during this conversation, we have had the opportunity to hear and listen to relevant experiences of the projects that are carried out in various countries. And so dealing mainly with projects dealing with that have a common denominator, which is to fight against the worry of the other and fighting against ignorance, which is very often really in us. And these various projects that are carried out not only target the community of religious leaders or professional organizations, but also target the MPs through the various initiatives that are carried out by yourselves in your respective and with regard in connection with the IUP activities. We have equally thought at the end of the day, all these projects, even if the fundamental goal is to fight against hatred and against ignorance, the final goal at the end of the day is that we need to help each other so that we build a better world. What are the findings? Is that the first is that the fundamental condition sine qua non that in order to have a dialogue involving parliamentarians, academia, and religious leaders, and building trust. Trust is the name of the game. Particularly, trust is the one that needs to spearhead and guide the dialogue. During the 3 days that we shared together, we have been able to exchange in peace and trust. We have opened our hearts and to be sincere vis-à-vis the others, particularly with this has made it possible to exchange with political representations, with MPs, all from all countries of the world and all walks of the life, beyond the political opinions, and this is beautiful, an achievement. We think also that there can be we cannot have a dialogue, really significant dialogue and constructive dialogue without building trust. Trust is equally a indispensable prerequisite so that this dialogue has a meaning and is meaningful. A dialogue that can yield fruit. And in order to build this trust that I am talking about, the quality, the basic quality, so that we need to create an environment of mutual respect, whereby principles of equality and the shared values and solidarity are indispensable and are reinforced and are present and constant. So during the work of our panel, and right from the beginning of our exchanges, and right from we put in practice this idea that I share with you. I will be sharing it. And so far, we have decided together with the panelists and the facilitator that there be no panel Indeed, each panelist expressed himself or herself in order to engage in a very horizontal dialogue. There was no exchange between the podium and the public, and this was a horizontal type of, this was appreciated highly and praised highly by all the participants in the workshop, because this has made it possible to establish right from the beginning the criteria of equality of everyone, equality of opportunities for all, and to have engaged in an exchange on an equal footing. It's equally quite important to highlight one thing. In this very dialogue, we wish to have, we need not promote some opinions against others. It's quite important from this perspective to underscore and to appraise all the interventions, whether with interpersons, particularly coming from people from different creeds, from different experts. All the interventions are quite important and meaningful. They have the same value as far as dialogue is concerned. And finally, we think that beyond all what we have learned all along the 3-day-long seminar, during which we shared quite a lot, we still need and badly need to translate what we have exchanged into actions, best practices, which means that we have not simply come to Marrakesh to exchange, but this marvelous opportunity that was made to us makes it possible to translate our words into actions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The report on rule of law, clarifying the relationship between the rule of law and freedom of religion and belief in order to preserve the state of citizenship, presented by Mr. Izo Igwe, founder of the foundation, Nigerian Foundation.
Our panel discussed clarifying the relationship between the rule of law and freedom of religion or belief to preserve statehood and citizenship. The panel discussed the relationship between the rule of law and freedom of religion or belief. First, the panelists and the moderator provided working definition of these concepts. The rule of law safeguards the social order, so all individuals in a given society abide by the same laws and benefit equally from their protection. The rule of law is therefore rooted in a social contract between members of a community, that is the citizens in a broad sense. This idea contrasts with divine sovereignty, embedded in the notion of God's authority over creation. Freedom of religion or belief is a human right that should be respected regardless of an individual's religious adherence, country, gender, age, ethnicity, etc. Difficulties can emerge at the intersection between the rule of law and freedom of religion or belief. Here, the expression of religion or belief based on divine sovereignty competes with other rights enshrined by the rule of law, including the freedom of religion or belief of other individuals, thus challenging the social contract. Where authorities illegitimately seek to limit freedom of religion or belief, often targeting marginalized groups. In these cases, the rule of law must be maintained to preserve the social contract from which statehood and citizenship derive. The panel discussed situations in which those that do not share the religion of the majority have been persecuted. In that regard, upholding the rule of law to guarantee freedom of religion or belief is also critical to the realization of an inclusive interfaith dialogue. Intra and interfaith dialogue should be understood as an exercise of equals, in which multiple truths can coexist, and in which one person's freedom of religion ends where another begins. In conclusion, the panel agreed that the momentum should be sustained, encouraging all participants to engage in further dialogue. The panel also invited the IPU to consider the development of a self-assessment toolkit and model legislation for parliaments to gauge their religious sensitivity and uphold the rule of law, guaranteeing the freedom of religion or belief for all members of the society. Once again, I thank the IPU for inviting Humanist International to this event.
شكراً.
Thank you. The conclusions of the discussion regarding the alliance between religious leaders and parliamentarians for the promotion of gender equality and the participation of youth. This will be presented by Mrs. Sabina Gucci, the representative of the International Parliamentary Platform for Freedom of Religion, member of the Federal Parliament in Bosnia-Herzegovina.
Thank you for the introduction. Well, I'm privileged here considering that I am the only participant of the panel providing this report from the panel that was moderated by Her Excellency Ambassador Pikter Altan, who couldn't be here today with us and who's a permanent observer of the Sovereign Order of Malta to the IPO and the UN in Geneva. Our panel discussed the issue of religious actors and parliamentarians as allies from promoting gender and youth participation. We discussed existing barriers to meaningful participation of women and youth and the ways to overcome them. We moved away from simply identifying the problems and actually talked about the solutions, best and necessary practices to provide a meaningful participation of women and youth at the decision-making tables, both in parliaments and faith-based organizations. We agree that quotas are not enough. They're just the beginning. They're a necessary beginning for providing meaningful participation of women and youth. We agreed that women and young people, both in parliaments and faith-based organizations, must not be decorations of these organizations and institutions, but they are necessary participants who not only bring diversity, but bring unique perspectives, necessary perspectives in these power structures. We agreed that what is necessary to be done is to reduce age of eligibility on parliamentarians to include more youth aligned with voting rights, facilitate more youth and women in leadership positions in both parties, political parties, parliaments, and faith-based organizations. We focused on the issues that we realized that we need to focus on the issues that are inspiring to women and youth in politics, because we are identifying decreasing numbers of women and young people interested in engaging in politics, and the way to tackle that is actually to inspire them by engaging in policies that are addressing issues that are targeting actually the problems identified by youth and women. We discussed that we need to address gender-based violence and sexism, as well as youth depreciation with and within the political parties themselves to change the culture of parliaments. We agree that it's actually political parties themselves who are carriers of emancipatory processes that then will be reflected in the parliaments, and that the necessary changes need to take place at the root and not once when it's already late in the parliaments. Finally, the participants of the panel agreed that an active involvement of youth and women in politics will help rebuild trust in democratic institutions and establish a not only more inclusive society, but a society that actually represents the diversity of the world in which we live. We participated here for 3 interesting, maybe even magnificent days here in Morocco, in Marrakesh. And what became evident is that many of you who stood at this podium said we need to work together. It's a privilege for me as a parliamentarian from Bosnia and Herzegovina to have access to leaders of faith-based organizations and religious leaders, and to talk about the ways in which we can work and must work together in bringing underprivileged groups to the decision-making table and ensuring meaningful participation, and not just participation, but actually decision-making by the underrepresented groups. Let's not shy away from the individual responsibility that each and every one of us has here to provide mechanisms, resources, and what we all on the panel agreed, paths to education, emancipatory education, both in faith-based organizations and in politics, for particularly marginalized groups, which unfortunately women and young people continue to be in our organizations. Thank you.
شكرا سيدتي.
Thank you. The report on promoting trust and mutual recognition, the contributions of religious actors and parliamentarians to counter hate speech, incitement to violence, and digital challenges to democracy. This is to be presented by Mrs. Nihal Saad, Director, UNAOC, United Nations Alliance of Civilizations. Madam, the floor is yours.
شكرا جزيلا سيدي الرئيس.
Thank you very much.
And allow me to present a summary or the findings of the panel discussion on promoting trust and mutual recognition, the contributions of religious actors and parliamentarians to counter hate speech, incitement to violence, and digital challenges to democracy. I had the pleasure to moderate that panel. Our panel tackled the issues of hate speech, violence, and addressed the new digital challenges to democracy. Part of our discussion questioned the relationship between freedom of religion or belief on the one hand and the freedom of expression on the other. Participants especially emphasized the necessity to rebuild trust, to promote quality education on these issues, and to advocate for constructive cooperation between parliamentarians and religious actors to counter these narratives of hatred. Throughout the discussion, participants acknowledged the main challenges posed by our new digital era. One, we lost sight of solidarity and lack human interaction. Two, we are facing dis and misinformation and are confronted with hate speech. The business models, the current business models and the way they function when it comes to social media tends to amplify these messages, hate messages, that would have otherwise had limited outreach in real life settings. And that's why extent matters, the extent of outreach matters. Anonymity on the internet encourages people to make statements that they would not have made otherwise in real life settings as well. Participants also proposed and shared recommendations to better address these challenges and be able to provide counter narratives to hatred. One, acknowledging the lack of fruitful interaction between the different stakeholders, and this corresponds in a way to what we label or characterize as a whole of a society approach to counter hate speech. We need to rebuild trust in each other and strengthen human ties by promoting values of solidarity, compassion, and mutual respect. We need to reflect on the notion of otherness and promote equality, listen to the other, and have respect to those with whom we differ. The second point is promoting quality education at several levels. We need quality education to equip youth with critical thinking skills that will enable them to recognize and deconstruct hate speech. We need training and a knowledge of the digital tools and to keep up with the same pace and speed with which these digital platforms and new technologies are evolving. 3, encouraging constructive cooperation between parliamentarians and religious actors. Faith groups can help parliaments with delivering policy frameworks. Parliamentarians and FBOs or faith-based organizations have to work together for global norms to establish a clear and international definition of hate speech and make sure that parliaments align their national legislation with international standards rooted in human rights laws, relevant human rights laws, and particularly those related to fundamental freedoms of religion and belief and freedom of expression. We need to bring religious leaders in parliaments, in hearings, and in advisory boards to provide their input and help influence the legislation. Last but not least, I would like to make a concluding point that I see that it's very important and it's very important to emphasize it here, which is the inter-relevance, the interrelation and the interdependence between Articles 18 and Articles 19 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This is the freedom of religion and belief and the freedom of expression. Both of them are very much interrelated and interdependent. Free speech is not hate speech. And free speech does not mean the right to insult other faiths or the adherents of that faith. I thank you very much.
Thanks very much indeed, Madam, for your contribution. Outcomes with regard to the mediation entrusted to parliamentary and religious people to strengthen rights and liberties for fair and wiser communities will be presented by Mrs. Deepika Singh, the Deputy Assistant Secretary for the organization Religions for Peace.
Very rich discussion on legislature and religious leaders serve as bridge builders, promoting rights and fundamental freedom for more just and cohesive society. We had the opportunity and the pleasure of greatly benefiting from the expertise, insight, and lived experience of our various panelists. It fully came out in the discussion that legislators and religious leaders do serve as bridge builders between different sectors of society and play an integral role in promoting and upholding the fundamental rights and freedom of all citizens. While it is important to distinguish the political and religious spheres of society, strengthened and sustained dialogue and engagement between legislators and religious actors is key to the realization and actualization of positive peace and the common good. As the collaboration and joint efforts of all sectors are integral to addressing today's challenges, it is also clear that the social cohesion built on shared care and trust is a prerequisite for effective and sustainable action and the common good. For effective dialogue, fostering linkages and building bridges among the various actors and sectors of society requires conducive conditions, be responsive to local context and situation, and flexible enough to change as per the need. Equally important is the inclusivity in terms of religion, gender, age, and geography. Another vital component is that was mentioned was an emphasis on the fact that we need to ensure that women and youth are in the decision-making platforms and their voices are amplified. We also went into great details to talk about how legislatures and religious leaders are and continue to work together to preserve fundamental freedom and ensure the gradual development of societies. As mentioned, one example was in Bahrain, the cooperation and dialogue between legislatures and the religious leaders was essential in the drafting of legislation addressing the personal status and the economic situation of low-income households. In Malawi, religious leaders hold accountable legislatures when their political discourses turn into hate speech. They work together as agents for peace and stability. In Benin, legislatures have ensured that religious communities can celebrate religious holidays according to their beliefs. Legislatures are the interpreters of the heartbeat of their constituents, while religious leaders have the capacity to inspire their followers to achieve nobility. Together, they have a unique opportunity to restore trust. However, for the cooperation to work, dialogue between legislatures and religious leaders should be sincere, deep, realistic, and pragmatic. They should set aside their political and religious differences, as collaboration leaves no room for competition. Legislatures and religious leaders should also shoulder their respective responsibilities, whether they are in secular society or not. Religious leaders should ensure that the religious discourse is used in a conscious manner and remind all sectors of society that human existence is governed by social and moral laws of cause and effect. Legislatures, on the other hand, should work with all religion, not only the ones that they support or the ones they come from. Finally, both legislatures and religious leaders should ensure that their collaboration is inclusive and involves all stakeholders, particularly women, young people, tribal leaders, and other minorities. So how do we move forward from here? Well, we need to ensure that the basic requirements to include women and youth and minorities are met in order to enable these groups to participate in a meaningful manner in the interfaith dialogue. We need to ensure that at the international level, the flow of information reaches the local level. At the regional level and local level, the international community, state actors, and other relevant stakeholders are encouraged to also support local and regional coalition, including those led by women and young people. Thank you so much.
شكراً.
Thank you very much. I would like now, in my own name and on behalf of the International Parliamentary Union and the Moroccan Parliament, to extend my sincere thanks to the rapporteurs of the different meetings and sessions that we have held and the outcomes that they have shared with us. We now move on to the final communique of this conference, and I would like to give the floor to Mrs. Ayantutai to tackle the first part on the whereases or preambular part of this final document of our conference. You have the floor, madam.
Thank you. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, all protocols truly observed. I'm really, truly honored and humbled to present to you the Marrakesh communique, which is prepared in the name of parliamentarians as a document of the IPU, which is also embodied in the value of religious leaders here and also faith actors who are working in the faith-based circle. From the discussion we had in these 3 days, we believe that interfaith dialogue that is grounded in support of fundamental rights and freedoms is an essential tool for promoting inclusivity and peaceful coexistence. Upholding the true rule of law and encouraging collective efforts to achieve a better society. While religions and beliefs of various types may inform us about the world and our fellow citizens, the first responsibility as legislators and religious leaders is to the people we represent, helping to secure the material circumstances of a good and healthy life for all. It's our responsibility to uphold the rule of law and all human rights and fundamental freedoms, including freedom of thought, conscience, religion or belief, freedom of speech, and freedom of assembly. We also affirm the importance of ensuring that such rights and freedoms are enjoyed by all without discrimination. As the world emanates from 3 years of pandemic, we are facing a surge in armed conflicts, geopolitical tensions, and environmental degradation, which reinforce existing inequalities, economic instability, and humanitarian crisis. We are witnessing the shrinkage of civic space, increasing ideological polarization, and the growth of politically motivated violence in many contexts. Disinformation and hate speech are becoming more prevalent, often amplified by social media. Feelings of insecurity are high, and citizens' trust in their institutions is waning in many regions. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, intolerance towards minority or marginalized groups, including communities of religion and beliefs, is on the rise. These trends especially impact women who already face challenges accessing equal rights and experience diverse forms of discrimination and violence, with religion or beliefs sometimes serving as a pretext. The voice of youth, a ballooning demographic, remains sidelined. No religion or belief should be identified with the discrimination or marginalization of another community, nor should it condone violence against another community. We further reaffirm that terrorism and violent extremism as major ills threatening peace and security and should not be associated with any particular religion, belief, or ethno-religious community. We highlight the importance of moderation when resolving religious or belief-based conflicts and the significant role of dedicated mechanisms or institutions for conflict and dispute resolution. We further express our concern at the backsliding of the global state of democracy, the deterioration in human solidarity, and the weakening of the moral compass in politics and societies at large that can be seen in countries and communities around the world. We further express our concern at the global state of democracy. Addressing these issues requires concerted and decisive action from all of us, from parliamentarians with their legislative power, as well as from all parts of the society, including official institutions, religious and belief communities, faith-based and civil society organizations, and the academia. Times of crisis and uncertainty especially call for solid leadership to bring people together around a common vision of the future. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we believe strongly in the need for social contract that reinforce the common dignity, fraternity, and equality of all. We share a commitment to building resilient societies in which all people feel equally included. We encourage a culture of dialogue in parliaments as an essential tool of peace and inclusion. We commit ourselves to respectful conduct towards all people, as well as to the avoidance of divisive rhetoric around religion or belief to serve a political agenda. We acknowledge that leaders of religious and belief communities, including traditional leaders, are often influential public figures with wide outreach. Religious and belief networks transcend constituencies and national borders. They are often the first respondents in emergencies and provide an important safety net to people in need. We are also deeply inspired by the many initiatives of religious and belief communities aimed at promoting peaceful coexistence and equal rights among all people. Now I'll invite on the President of the House of Representatives of the Parliament of Morocco to deliver on the operative part of the outcome. Thank you.
شكرا.
Thank you. Distinguished Ayan Totaye is a member of the Joint Initiative for Strategic Religious Action. Thank you very much for introducing this preamble part. And before reading the recommendations, I would like once again to extend my sincere thanks to the rapporteurs who have given us a clear idea about our proceedings and provided us with an initial reports, knowing that the detailed reports will be prepared later on, and you will receive them from the International Parliamentary Union. I would like to remind you briefly of what we have agreed upon in Marrakesh regarding the new horizon, that cooperation between parliamentarians and religious leaders and representatives of civil society can do in order to serve interfaith and coexistence between different cultures and civilizations. These are the recommendations that are included in the final communique distributed to you, and I will read them out. Ensure that all religions, beliefs, and faith-based organizations are treated equally and without any discrimination under the law. Include representatives of religions, beliefs, and faith-based organizations alongside other civil society representatives in the ongoing efforts to secure the implementation of national legislation and international commitments and the promotion of social cohesion, taking into consideration diversity. Engage a dialogue with religious and belief leaders and communities to help build solidarity and effectively rise to the major challenges of our time, such as poverty, inequality, climate change, conflicts, and war, as well as widespread addiction, overconsumption, and digital technology, including the negative uses of artificial intelligence. Set up parliamentary groups or parliamentary committees within national parliaments on interfaith and intercultural dialogue for peaceful coexistence and social inclusion, and enable cooperation between these groups or committees. Promote greater cooperation between religious and belief representatives and national authorities in combating crimes such as human trafficking, domestic servitude, domestic violence, and forced labor, and ensuring the protection of the victims thereof. Develop parliamentary codes of conduct to ensure respect for the rights to freedom and religion, belief, and prevention of hate speech. Promote the principles of inclusion and diversity from an early age, including education about the other, as well as respect for all religions and beliefs, knowing that these are foundational principles of peaceful and inclusive societies. Engage in advocacy for public education and awareness raising focused on promoting respect and understanding between individuals and communities across religions and beliefs, upholding the dignity of all. Counter the hate speech or contempt for individuals due to their religious or belief affiliation, and robustly address discriminatory treatment, including through legislative initiatives. Encourage the International Parliamentary Union to map best parliamentary practices in support of diversity, tolerance, and dialogue, upholding citizenship and the citizenship values and the rule of law, and provide guidance to parliaments in this regard. Encourage leaders of religions and beliefs to promote inclusivity, fundamental human rights, and gender equality within their communities in line with national legislation and international commitments. Deepen interaction with the United Nations, other international bodies, and civil society, and explore avenues for the implementation of United Nations strategies and relations and resolutions on interfaith and intercultural dialogue in order to address implementation gaps at the national level. Set up institutional mechanism within the IPU to build on the outcomes of this conference, this Marrakesh conference, in order to examine good practices, monitor progress, and formulate proposals in this area, that is, with respect to interfaith dialogue. This mechanism should continue to incorporate the voices of parliamentarians, representatives, religious representatives, and leaders, as well as civil society. Call on the International Parliamentary Union to integrate the outcomes of this conference, that is the Marrakesh conference, into its regular program of work, and to submit this document to the 147th IPU Assembly to be held in October 2023. Welcome the invitation extended by the Parliament of Italy to the Interparliamentary Union to organize a global interfaith meeting in Rome in 2025. These were the conclusions and recommendations included in the final communique, and in keeping with the bylaws of the Interparliamentary Union, I consider that these have been agreed. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. I now give the floor. Before I give the floor, actually, to my colleague, the Speaker, Mayara, Speaker of the House of Councillors, to make an address at the end of this conference, I would like to give the floor to the Secretary General of the Interparliamentary Union, my colleague Martin Chandong, to say a few words to the conference participants. Thank you.
Right Honorable Speaker of the House of Representatives, thank you for giving me the floor. I would also like to recognize the presence beside you of the House, the Speaker of the House of Councillors of the Kingdom of Morocco, and other distinguished members of the podium here. Honorable speakers and members of Parliament present here, I think I'm safe in saying that we had some 70 delegations or parliaments represented at this meeting, distinguished representatives of various religious and faith-based organizations attending this meeting, ladies and gentlemen. I don't know what to say here. I'm so emotional now at this. At the end of this meeting, just when I was beginning to enjoy it, it's almost over. But I think I speak for all of us when I say that this has been a great conference. When we decided to hold this conference, we were wading into uncharted waters. We didn't know what to expect. It was the first time we were attempting to bring together parliamentarians, religious leaders, and civil society. And indeed, over the past 3 days, I've had to be pinching myself all the time during breakfast when I see not only people wearing suits, but also people wearing religious attires, all of them very elegant. And then I realized that we're all participating in the same meeting. And that is what I think Parliament is all about, bringing together people of all backgrounds to hold discussions, dialogue, in order to find solutions to the issues that are facing humanity. So I can say, and this is at the risk of patting ourselves on the back, that this conference has exceeded expectations. We did record an attendance of over 700 participants, including, as I have just said, some 70 parliamentary delegations and a host of religious and faith-based organizations. One regret when listening to the reports from the rapporteurs on the panels, one regret is that we did not have enough representation of a category of people, and I believe that is one of the lessons we have learned. Academia. Academia was not here, or they were here, but they were underrepresented. So I think that we take home this lesson learned and make sure, in the name of inclusion, that next time we have more representatives from academia. Let me then, on your behalf, extend our thanks to our gracious Moroccan hosts for hosting this very important conference under the high patronage of His Majesty King Mohammed VI of the Kingdom of Morocco. And I would like I was going to ask you to applaud our hosts and the leaders, but you have preceded me, and thank you very much. Honorable speakers of the two houses of the Moroccan parliaments, together with all those people who supported you in this endeavor. The facilities were great. This conference center was just excellent. Your hospitality was so generous and warm. Last night we were treated to a wonderful dinner, gala, and I believe all of us had a good time yesterday. We're able to see another side of Morocco that we were not aware of. Thank you very much for that opportunity. Of course, I said that this was a multi-stakeholder endeavor. We had a host of other partners who were with us. We have Religions for Peace, which I am ashamed to say I was discovering. I had known of their work, but I had not had the opportunity to be engaged with them. And I must say that it has been an amazing experience. Thank you, Religions for Peace. Of course, we have our HO partners, the United Nations Alliance of Civilizations. Nihal, thank you very much for being such a strong partner. Thank you very much. Thank you. Then Dr. Abadi. Everybody kept asking me, who is that great guy? Who is that great guy? And I said, I became really jealous. I became really jealous because I thought I was the great guy. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your support from the Muhammadiyah League of Religious Scholars. It has been great. I see our distinguished colleague, the independent expert on freedom of religion here and left and center. There are so many people here who work with us. Thank you all. But let me record a special word of thanks to those people whom we don't see very much, the unsung heroes. I mean, the administrative staff of the Parliament of Morocco, ably led by the two Secretaries General sitting there. Over the past several months, I have been witnessing the almost daily interaction between you, your colleagues in the administration, and my colleagues in the Secretariat in the IPU. And I think I grew accustomed to the fact that we were going to deliver a good product here. And thank you very much for that support. Ambassador Philip, my colleague here, sitting here, you and I were just having a conversation here, and she said, look at that amazing group of young people from the IPO who contributed to this work, and effectively. And I said, yes, that is the changing face of the IPU. The younger generation is taking over, and I want to say thank you to all my colleagues. Can you stand up, let them say hello to you? I mean, everybody from the IPU. Come on, Laurence, Sarah, and everything. Sally Ann, all of that. Thank you. Thank you. And of course, the Moroccan, Mr. Secretary General, if you do have your colleagues in the room here, staff members, please let them just stand up so we can acknowledge them. I want to acknowledge the strong contribution too of those without whom we would not be able to understand ourselves. The interpreters who have worked tirelessly. I don't know where they are, but I can hear them. And so there is dialogue, and that dialogue has been possible because we have some people who have broken down the language barrier. So I want to acknowledge them. But, Mr. Speaker, you will forgive me if I go on and on here. It is just because I think that a lot has happened during these past 3 days, and it is important for us as the umbrella organization of parliaments to say how convinced we are of the initiative that we have launched in support, with support from the Kingdom of Morocco. First of all, I think I have learned a lot. There's one thing that I got confirmation of, and that is parliamentarians talking a lot. And it comes from the very word parliament. Parliament is parler in French, or speaking. I knew that working with parliamentarians, they speak. But now I have learned that religious leaders and stakeholders also like to talk. And that is why we had the dialogue here. The lesson we have learned, Ambassador Philip, dear Anda, is that next time we should provide for longer days here in another conference such as this one so that we can have more discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary General. Just
Let me conclude.
excuse me. I thought that you finished.
Okay, sorry. Let me say that I have learned those lessons, but I think, as I said, we're wading into uncharted waters. The issue of interfaith dialogue may be very fraught, may be very sensitive, but I thought that the initiative was a sensible one, promoting dialogue between these different communities. And that is why I think we have just adopted unanimously the communique, which is our common understanding of what the issue is and how we can move forward to address those challenges. Because we think that the world today is fraught with a lot of crises and conflict, and it is because the various communities are not talking to one another in order to understand their differences and see how they can be resolved. And I'm glad that we're able to give this opportunity to you all. I'm glad that we had a meeting of the minds with the Moroccan authorities. And let me give you 3 messages that I think I'm taking away with me, and I believe you'll agree with me. First of all, we kept on and on talking about equality, the importance of equal rights and dignity for humankind. We talked about the right to the freedom of religion. We should not just be paying lip service to the right to the freedom of religion. We talked about our joint freedom to uphold these rights. We also, ladies and gentlemen, stressed the need for religion or belief to be protected collectively as a possibility and a requirement to protect individuals and not religions per se. I think this is a very important message for me. Secondly, as His Majesty the King said in his inaugural message to us, what our world is witnessing today is not so much a clash of civilization as a clash of ignorances. Let us work together to promote education, as many of you said in the reports that came up here, education about the other, trying to understand the other, about religion and belief driven by respect, respect in capital letters. I think I had that word in virtually all the reports that were presented to you today. Lastly, parliamentarians and religious leaders have different mandates, of course, but many things in common. We are both leaders, and we are here. We all aim to serve our communities. Let us see where we can work in the service of our people, promote solidarity, gender equality, youth participation, and thank you very much, young people. Counter intolerance, that was stressed in the final communique, counter intolerance, and uphold the rights of all. So, I believe that the greatest gift that these past days have given us all has been trust. Trust that has been built because we have been able to talk with one another, we have been able to converse with one another, expressing our various points of view, because we are united in our common ambition to save humanity. So, the words are inclusion, respect, trust, of course, all of this intended to build a better world for all of us. And it is only possible if we can dialogue, we can converse with one another. And I offer that parliaments, as the representative institutions of societies, must take the initiative, must drive this dialogue between communities irrespective of their differences. Thank you very much.
My dear friend and brother, Nama Mayara, speaker, in a closing address to the attendees in this conference. Thank you. In the name of Allah, most merciful, most compassionate, peace and bliss, Honorable Rashid Talbi Alami, Speaker of the House of Representatives, honorable presidents and representative of the parliament, the honorable presidents of religious, the honorable secretary general of the IPU, ladies and gentlemen, dear attendees, good afternoon. After 3 days of hard work, of rich discussion and wide exchange of ideas, we are meeting today in this closing session so that we can coronate the findings of our important work on the topic of interfaith dialogue, working for our own future, and which is quite a vital topic that is quite important, more particularly with regard to the Morocco at the highest level. This is the reason why this conference was granted with the patronage of His Majesty, the Commander of the Faithful, His Majesty King Mohammed VI. And as we saw, all the deliberations of the opening sessions yesterday, the royal message was quite important, illuminating for all of us, and was full with quite a number of meanings, particularly on the land of Morocco and population of Morocco all throughout the history. And it has come as an indicator, particularly for the commitment of His Majesty on the basis of his religious responsibility and temporal responsibility in order to save coexistence, religious practices, but in a concrete, tangible way, locally and internationally. The content of the royal message, more particularly, transcends, particularly to the level of the important document. It's quite profitable to see these documents as illuminating beacon that will chalk the way forward for us as parliamentaries under the leadership of our IPU, more particularly in order to empower people so that they can engage in interfaith dialogue and intra-dialogue, and making of this dialogue an ongoing dialogue, more particularly involving religious institutions, legislative institutions, and parliamentarians regionally and internationally. Ladies and gentlemen, dear attendees, allow me to express to all the participants in this quite important Congress, particularly on everyone in his own respect, our appreciation and gratitude, more particularly for the rich presentations and the rich contributions that they have made all along the discussions and in the workshop that encompassed these discussions that were made were high, or demonstrated a high level of interest, particularly by the religious and parliamentaries, particularly, but that led to quite a number of similarities in the positions and viewpoints, more particularly, and it became clear to all the need to move forward with this dialogue, and with this dialogue that we are inaugurating from Marrakesh on, so that it can continue in upcoming sessions in other continents. The participants really recorded with quite a lot of prestige that involving religious people as well as parliamentarians is quite needed in order to build the foundations for social cultural ethnic institutions where peace and coexistence prevail through the use of religion, particularly not for political purposes, but issuing really laws that will enhance and uphold the rights of minorities and will protect the rights of the minorities and will protect the dignity of women in particular. And so there is need for more coordination, constructive coordination involving the parliamentarian institutions on not only on the regional level but on the international level, particularly to consolidate the values of opening and fighting against discrimination, fanaticism. Everybody expressed his conviction, particularly on the importance of democracy and representation that is enjoyed by the parliamentarian institutions, and also the participation of religious people because they have influence and they have clout, and particularly they work towards particularly in their communities to avoid that these communities really have to deal with the pitfalls of counter-terrorism, terrorism and fundamentalism, which are witnessed today on in many regards. The continuation of collaboration and coordination between all these components will still stay really quite will be badly needed, and this is quite an important historical moment, more particularly so that we can provide the world and the future generations with the findings that we have been able to. The participants really have stressed the importance of making many efforts, exerting and deploying very efforts to continue the work in order to consolidate coexisting and more particularly enhancing the awareness, particularly of the youth segments of the population, so that we can avoid the pitfalls of behavioral changes in this. There is need to involve more youth, particularly they are the future of us tomorrow particularly, and there is need so that they can be fully part and parcel of the of our work. And so our discussions have shown that we badly need to strengthen our efforts. We, the parliamentarians, the religious people, we need programs and very constructive projects in order to do away and ban and bar the erroneous interpretations of religion so that we can contribute to a fight against radicalism, also to defamation, religious defamation and insults of religions, particularly that are widespread, that exacerbates the hate speech and particularly force people to really forced migration, with particularly the participants agreed on the role to clarify the rule and to strike a balance as an added value in the human rights and also in respecting religion in order to protect and enhance coexistence between all religions. Then we badly need also to really to confront all the legislations that restricts and limits the freedom of the individual and also impact negatively the minorities. It's quite urgent to remove all the barriers standing in the way of religions so that we can really so that peace can prevail and coexistence prevail. It's quite important within this regard to stress the importance to really to engage in the provision of training for religious people so that they can engage in consolidating and the dialogue with the parliaments particularly. And we need to build trust and more particularly to be pragmatic in order to confront the problem of having communities living in peace. These are some of the bullet points accruing from this conference because they stem from the rich discussions that we initiated collectively, and so they are quite important in our country, and there is need, but with the will at the highest level and with dialogue, multifaceted dialogue particularly, this is quite important under the umbrella of the IPU, and for this particularly in order to remove violence and to have more harmony, and more particularly thinking about our present and future. Ladies and gentlemen, before closing, I would like to thank you again and would like to express my gratitude and appreciation to the members of parliaments nationally and internationally, the representatives of various delegations, the president of the IPU and the secretary general of the IPU, and also the institutions that have sponsored the Mohammedia League of Moroccan Scholars and the United Nations offices, and all the experts, and to the representative of the mass media, and also to the staff of the IPU and the staff of the Moroccan Parliament, thanking you in advance, and please let our paths cross in the future on a topic that will be considerable, particularly on the agenda. And I'd like to thank you immensely for your attention, and peace and blessing of God be with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And this concludes our proceedings, and we look forward to seeing you at the next conference. Thank you so much again, and we adjourn. Thank you very much.